If thinking you falling for someone is the hardest part of love, wait until life tests whether that connection can survive pressure, distance, and fear. Because by the time Daniel Harper realized Amelia Carter was no longer just a pleasant coincidence, but a presence woven into his daily thoughts, the universe seemed determined to complicate everything. It started on an otherwise ordinary Monday morning in Chicago, when Daniel's firm announced that the waterfront project he had poured months into designing was now under threat from a competing corporation offering a more aggressive financial proposal, forcing him into longer hours, emergency meetings, and strategic negotiations that stretched late into the night. And while ambition had always energized him, this time the weight felt different, heavier, because for the first time in years, he had someone waiting outside the glass walls of his career. Amelia, meanwhile, had just received news of her own opportunity, an invitation to join a month-long photography exhibit tour across the West Coast, a dream assignment that promised exposure and credibility she had been chasing for years. Yet instead of celebrating without hesitation, she found herself calculating how absence might affect something still fragile and undefined. When they met that evening at their now familiar lakeside cafe, both carried unspoken concerns beneath practiced smiles. Daniel listening attentively as Amelia shared her excitement about the exhibit, his pride in her achievement genuine, but shadowed by the realization that a month apart could stretch into emotional distance. And Amelia observing the tension in his shoulders as he described corporate negotiations that demanded total focus, recognizing the silent fear that their timing might not be aligned. Neither wanted to appear insecure, yet vulnerability hovered between them like a question neither dared to ask directly. And so they circled around it, discussing logistics rather than feelings, practicalities instead of promises. Later, as they walked along the shoreline under a sky streaked with fading light, Amelia stopped abruptly, turning to face him with a seriousness that cut through casual conversation, asking whether he believed something so new could withstand separate paths pulling in opposite directions. And Daniel, who had built his life on predictability, hesitated only briefly before admitting that for the first time, he was willing to try without guarantees, because what they were building felt worth uncertainty. That confession settled gently but powerfully between them, dissolving some of the tension yet introducing a deeper truth, that love was not about convenience but about choice, repeated daily despite obstacles. In the days that followed, their schedules intensified, Daniel often buried in conference rooms illuminated by sterile overhead lights, while Amelia prepared portfolios and travel arrangements in her art-filled studio, yet they carved out moments whenever possible, late-night phone calls filled with laughter and shared exhaustion, brief lunches squeezed between obligations, text messages that carried reassurance in simple words. Still, pressure has a way of magnifying doubts, and one evening when Daniel missed a planned dinner due to an emergency meeting, Amelia found herself questioning whether she would always come second to her career, while Daniel, staring at spreadsheets long after midnight, wondered if he was already failing at balancing ambition with connection. The tension surfaced unexpectedly when Amelia attended a gallery preview alone, surrounded by industry professionals discussing travel plans and creative risks, and she realized she was hesitating to fully commit to the tour because of him, a realization that frightened her more than distance itself. Later that night, when Daniel finally arrived at her apartment unannounced, apologetic and visibly drained, she confronted him gently but honestly, expressing her fear that their worlds might not align as seamlessly as their conversations had suggested. And for a moment, silence filled the room, heavy but necessary, until Daniel stepped closer and admitted that he did not want her to shrink her dreams for his convenience, that if anything, he admired her courage too much to stand in its way. His sincerity softened her defenses, and she confessed she was equally afraid of losing momentum in something that felt rare, something that had entered her life without warning, yet had already become significant. What followed was not dramatic or cinematic, but real, a conversation stripped of romantic illusions and layered instead with practical honesty, discussing expectations, independence, and the possibility of supporting each other without control. By the end of the evening, they had not solved every concern, yet they had chosen transparency over assumption, and that choice strengthened rather than weakened their bond. As Amelia's departure date approached, anticipation mingled with anxiety, their remaining time together feeling both precious and fleeting. And on her final night in Chicago before the tour, Daniel took her back to the waterfront site, the wind cool and steady against the darkened city skyline, and there, beneath unfinished blueprints and open sky, he admitted that meeting her had shifted his understanding of success, that perhaps building a meaningful life required more than architectural precision. It required courage to invest emotionally. Amelia listened with tears bright in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the depth of what was forming, and she promised that distance would not erase what had begun in the rain, that fate had not brought them together simply to test their endurance, but to teach them growth. When the morning of her flight arrived, the airport buzzed with movement and announcements, and Daniel stood beside her at the departure gate, aware that this was the first true test of their evolving relationship. And instead of dramatic declarations, he chose something steadier, telling her he would be here when she returned, not as an anchor holding her back, but as someone walking forward alongside her, even from afar. Amelia, gripping her boarding pass, leaned into him briefly, memorizing the rhythm of his heartbeat as if storing it for the weeks ahead. And when she finally walked toward security, she turned once more just as she had on that first rainy night, offering a smile filled with promise rather than uncertainty. As Daniel watched her disappear into the crowd, he felt both ache and determination, recognizing that love was not proven in proximity, but in persistence. And across the country, as Amelia's plane lifted above clouds, she gazed out at the vast horizon below, understanding that their story was no longer about coincidence, but about conscious commitment. Challenges still waited, careers would demand attention, and doubts would occasionally whisper. But somewhere between a scattered stack of drawings and a shared decision to face uncertainty together, two lives had begun intertwining in ways neither blueprint nor photograph could fully capture, because sometimes the greatest risk is not distance or ambition, it is daring to believe that what started by chance can grow stronger through choice.